Welcome, everybody. Assalamu alaikum. This is a session called Writer's Square. And can everybody hear me? All right, good. I'm very excited about this particular session and very honored to be in the company of three wonderful, great writers. I feel that maybe I was chosen as a moderator. I'll just dream about that. I was chosen as a moderator because I write about similar things. And those similar things, I think, are that we all four of us here in this Writer's Square, live in the company of ghosts and broken promises, and and those ghosts may be deeply wounded by different forms of violence. At least that's my take on it. And so I'll begin by introducing, from my right, we have Shehan. We are very lucky to have Shehan Karunatilaka, who is the Booker Prize winner for 2022, with his wonderful book, The 7 Moons of Mali Almeida. And in his own words, I think he says that as a Booker-winning writer of punchlines, manifestos, and calls to actions, that's who he is. He's a failed cricketer, failed rock star, with a great jacket today that shows the aspiration, a failed vegan, observer of people, machines, and markets, does not know how to use semicolons, and unable to spell diarrhea without assistance. Shehan has published 2 novels and 3 children's books, including Chinaman, The Legend of Pradeep Matthew, which was the winner of the 2012 Commonwealth Book Prize, and now The 7 Moons of Mali Almeida, which was, as I said, the winner of the Booker Prize in 2022. He has also written features on sports, music, and travel for The Guardian, Rolling Stones, Wisden, GQ, Condé Nast, and National Geographic. And that's all the introduction I'll give for him, because if you have been attending the other sessions that were held yesterday, all 3 of our authors here had wonderful sessions. I will ask Shehan to read and talk about his book, but I thought I would introduce everybody else right now as well. On my left is, again, I'm honored, Damon, to have had the chance to be in conversation with you around this festival. An absolutely lovely human being, and who's written The Promise, Damon Galgut. His name is spelt Galgut, but it's pronounced Galgut. Right? And he won the Booker in 2021 for his book, The Promise. It is the undoing of a bigoted South African family during apartheid, and Damon himself was born in Pretoria in 1963. He wrote his first novel, A Sinless Season, when he was 17. His other books include Small Circle of Beings, The Beautiful Screaming of Pigs, The Quarry, The Good Doctor, and The Imposter. The Good Doctor was shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize, the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, and the Dublin Impact Award. The Imposter was also shortlisted for the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, and he lives in Cape Town. And Damon's Booker Prize-winning novel, The Promise, is absolutely stunning, lyrical, quietly tells a huge, powerful story. And we'll let him talk a lot more about that shortly. And on my far left is, again, I'm honored, Sinan, to be in your company here. Sinan Antoon is a poet, a novelist, a scholar, and translator. He has published 2 collections of poetry and 4 novels in Arabic. His most recent work is the Book of Collateral Damage, which he will read from today. His poems have appeared in Plowshares, Massachusetts Review, and World Literature Today. His essays have appeared in the New York Times, Guardian, and The Nation. And he's an associate professor of Arabic literature at New York University. And his works have been translated into 13 languages. He was born and raised in Baghdad. And I will leave it here, and we'll take the rest in conversation. When I was reading a few of Sinan's poems, in English, of course, I felt that his poetry was the through line for all the writers here today. And so we'll come to your poetry, but I will ask Shehan to begin, start us off with telling us a little bit about your novel and then reading from it.
Sure. Yeah. So a little bit about the novel. What would you like to know? What it's about?
Is it on? Okay.
Yes, it is.
What I'd like to know is what brought you to writing it, because I think that the subject matter is a very brave thing to do in the current environment in your country. And that environment has been there for many years now. So it is, to me, an act of bravery, because it seems to me that you bring up the bodies and make sure that they all have voices.
Okay. Well, it started as an act of boredom, I think. I was tired of talking and writing about cricket, because my first novel was dealing with that. And I wanted to do something that'll stop getting me invited onto cricket panels to give analysis. And so I thought, a ghost story. Sri Lanka needs a good ghost story. And my idea was, I was influenced obviously by the end of the war, 2009, and the different narratives about how the civilians died in the last battles. And I thought, well, what if we allowed the dead to speak? What if we used a ghost story to allow the dead to give their version of events? Because obviously the different narratives aren't adding up. Maybe the dead could tell us what really happened and what they feel about Sri Lanka and their lives. And but I suppose I wasn't brave enough to write about contemporary issues. I still am not. But sadly, there were plenty of catastrophes and massacres to choose from. So I went to '89, which is what the period I remember as being the darkest period in Sri Lankan history, where we were fighting 3 different conflicts, and dead bodies were turning up all of the time, and no one knew who they were. They could be army, they could be tigers, they could be Marxists. And so I guess the story is just, it's a murder mystery at its heart, at its basic level. That's the engine that drives it. It's about a dead war photographer in 1989 who worked for all these different factions and has 7 moons or 7 days to find out who killed him. Also, he has a box of photographs that he believes will rock Sri Lanka and will end the war that he wants seen. And he also has to make sense of his own life. He was around for 35 years. What did he do with it? And the fractured relationships that he left behind. Of course, there's a vision of the afterlife. There's a fair bit of ghosts, wisecracking, and there's a bit of philosophizing. So a lot of moving parts. But the bit that I'll read from is one involving the cops trying to get rid of the bodies and trying to dispose of Mali's body. It happens quite early on. And, they say it takes a village to raise a child. I think it also seems to, from my research, takes a village to dispose of a body. I was sort of researching death squads in the late 80s, and yeah, you need the body disposers, you need the driver, you need a cop to kind of forge the death certificate, you need perhaps a minister to sign off on it, and so, and within that absurdity, I sort of looked at how these characters are dealing with it. So this is a bit where the 2 cops are deciding what to do to try and find Mali Almeida's body. The neighborhood was called Kompanya Vidya by the Sinhalese and Komanu Theru by the Tamils, both meaning Company Street. The British called it Slave Island. These names persist today and provide unsubtle clues to how natives and colonizers viewed one another. The back of the Hotel Leo is an abandoned lot that serves as a rubbish dump for the neighborhood. The surrounding streets are crumbling buildings and slums. The crenellated rooftops are occupied by worried cats and bored bats. Body was here? Detective Kasim points to the dent in the garbage bags with the splatters in red. Kottu and Balal nod. You thought it was a drop-off? Sir, this building is the drop-off point, says Kottu. You didn't think there was too much blood? Didn't think like that, sir. Detective Kasim shines a torch up the walls of the hotel. It looked like red and brown paint had been thrown down its side. You didn't notice these stains? Sir, when collecting garbage, no time to look at scenery. Keep talking like that and see what happens, snaps Constable Ranchagoda. From today, you will give full paperwork. Balal and Kottu are silent. Kasim shines his torch around the rest of the dump. The night has been one of bad smells. A breeze whizzes past him and makes him shiver. Detective Kasim turns to Kottu. He was thrown from one of those balconies. Not by us, right? Balal nods. Kottu coughs and looks away. So where's the rest of the body? Kottu looks at Balal, who looks at its feet. It's gone, sir. So I'm supposed to give his mother some limbs, a shoulder, and I don't know what that is. How do we prove it's Mali Almeida? Ranchagoda speaks up. If he was taken in before, his prints will be on file. Detective Kasim shakes his head. I trust our fingerprint department less than I trust you. Where is the head? Sir, we threw it in the lake. I don't want to hear it, okay? Get me the head. I don't care if you have to drain the whole stinking Beira Lake. I need it tonight. Kottu picks up the phone in the office and gets driver Malli out of bed. Detective Kasim lumbers towards the lift. Where are we going, detective? Asks Ranchagoda once they are out of earshot. You better put in for overtime, Puta. Ranchagoda pauses outside the lift and does not go in. Kasim gets inside and holds it with his finger. What's the issue? Boss, first you say you are transferring away from corpses. Now you want to put in overtime? We have a job to do. What's our job? We protect the innocent, says Detective Kasim. I thought we protect the powerful. Do we need to discuss this now? Kasim takes his finger off the button, which causes the doors to close. He curses and sticks his arm out to block the lift's jaws. Boss, I'm confused about another thing. Get in the lift now. Are we investigating this, or are we covering it up? Thank you.
Thank you, Shehan. But as you were reading, I was looking at Sinan's expressions. And I was wondering, Sinan, if you would mind reading us some of your poetry. I had asked you to read from your Arabic poetry, in Arabic, and then read it to us in English, because I feel that the passage that Shehan just read to us sort of segues right into your poetry. That's my sense of it.
Sure. Can you all hear me? Definitely. I'm going to say a few things about this poem. It's called A Postcard from the Underworld. Following the recent wars and the invasion of Iraq and the massive destruction of human life, I went back to reading a lot of the Mesopotamian mythology about the dead and the underworld. So that's the background, and a postcard. Maybe I'll read in English first and then read in Arabic. It's called A Postcard from the Underworld. I have never seen the sun. It does not rise here. My father saw it there before his death. He tells me about it all the time, about its ever-burning flames, like a candle, he said, lit by the gods, never to be extinguished, like the one I am holding now, here. He taught me how to put these bodies back together, to cover them with feathers so they could roam the darkness. Sometimes an arm or a leg remains. I put it in the corner and wait for the piles they bring the next day. I will ask my father about the eye. He hung on the wall a week ago. It is still shedding tears. And I wonder if it is longing for its sister or for the sun. So I will read the Arabic just so that you get an idea of the sounds. بطاقة من العالم السفلي. لم أرى الشمس أبداً فهي لا تشرق هنا. أبي رآها هناك قبل موته. كم حدثني عنها وعن لهبها المشتعل منذ الأزل. قال إنها مثل شمعة أوقدتها الآلهة لكنها لن تنطفئ أبداً كما ستنطفئ هذه التي أحملها هنا. هو الذي علمني كيف أعيد تركيب هذه الأجساد وأغطيها بالريش كي يهيم أصحابها في الظلام. أحياناً تظل ذراع أو ساق فأتركها في إحدى الزوايا وأنتظر أكوام اليوم التالي. سأسأل أبي عن العين التي علقها على الجدار قبل أسبوع. لم تتوقف عن ذرف الدموع. أتراها تحن إلى أختها أم إلى الشمس؟
Damon, will you do us the honor of reacting a little bit to Sinan's poetry and telling us a little bit about your own wonderful book, The Promise, and then reading us from the book?
Can you hear me? Good, yeah. Again, I'm not sure what it is you'd like me to tell you about my book, but I'll just frame it in very basic terms and say that it works on a simple premise that's divided into 4 sections. It's the story of a family told through the device of 4 family funerals. Death very much seems to be death and burial, I guess, seem to be the recurrent themes of our conversation today. And when I first got the idea for the book, I thought that, well, you know, family sagas are a staple, a literary staple, but I haven't read a family saga that's told through funerals. And I really liked it because in each section, you would just open a little window of a day or 2, and you would see the family and their behavior around that particular funeral. And the next time you see them would be in the next decade, and hopefully what the reader becomes aware of is how much has changed for the family, for the country, in the intervening years. So that's the basic premise of which I worked. At the heart of the book, there is a promise made to a black woman, Salome, who works for this white family, and the promise is that she will one day receive the broken down house on the worthless piece of land where she lives. The section I'm going to read pertains to that promise. The youngest daughter of this family, Amor, is sitting on a small koppie, which is what we in South Africa call a low hill, behind the farmhouse where her mother has died the previous night. And she's run there to get away from the gathering. So she's looking down on the farm, and through the window in her mother's bedroom, she sees Salome, the black lady, at the heart of this promise question. She knows she's just pretending, and the person in the room isn't Ma. It's Salome, of course, who's been here on the farm forever, or that's how it feels. My grandfather always talked about her like that. Oh, Salome, I got her along with the land. Pause a moment to observe as she takes the sheets off the bed. A stout, solid woman wearing a second-hand dress given to her by Ma years ago. A headscarf tied over her hair. She's barefoot, and the soles of her feet are cracked and dirty. Her hands have marks on them too, the scuffs and scars of innumerable collisions. Same age as Ma, supposedly, 40, though she looks older. Hard to put an exact number on her. Not much shows in her face, She wears her life like a mask, like a graven image. But some things you do know because you saw them yourself. In the same impassive way that Salome sweeps and cleans the house and washes the clothes of the people who live in it, she looked after Ma through her last illness, dressing and undressing her, helping her to bathe with a bucket of hot water and a lappy, helping her to go to the toilet, yes, even wiping her ass for her after she used the bedpan, mopping up blood and shit and pus and piss, all the jobs that people in her own family didn't want to do, too dirty or too intimate. Let Salome do it. That's what she's paid for, isn't it? She was with Ma when she died, right there next to the bed. Though nobody seems to see her, she's apparently invisible. And whatever Salome feels is invisible too. She has been told, clean up here, wash the sheets, and she obeys. She cleans up, she washes the sheets. But Amor can see her through the window, so she's not invisible after all. Thinking about a memory, not understood till now, of an afternoon just 2 weeks ago, in that same room with Ma and Pa. They forgot I was there in the corner. They didn't see me. I was like a black woman to them. Do you promise me, Mani? Holding on to him, skeleton hands grabbing like in a horror film. Yeah, I'll do it. Because I really want her to have something after everything she's done. I understand, he says. Promise me you'll do it. Say the words. I promise, Pa says, choked sounding. She sees the picture still. Her parents tangled together like Jesus and his mother. A terrible, sad knot of clutching and crying. The sound somewhere else, higher up and apart, the words not reaching her till now. But finally, she understands who they were talking about. Of course, obviously, duh. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Damon. Could you speak more to the context of South Africa and the transition that you're writing about from apartheid onwards? Did your own experiences in any way come into the book, or is this pure imagination that you're writing?
Both are true, I guess. It's pure imagination in the sense that this family and their personalities and their conversations and the things that happen have nothing to do with my background. But in the sense that absolutely everything in this book comes from my adult consciousness of being a white South African and what that has meant over the last 4 decades. So one draws on real experience for the emotions and feelings of a book, and then you draw, I guess, on your imagination to give shape to them. At least that's how this book took form.
Just to push you, what has that meant?
What?
Being white, white South African.
Well, this book is the best answer I can give you, but I mean, I'm sure I don't have to tell you that the system of apartheid was meant to benefit people like me, and did for many, many years. It no longer serves that purpose, but it does leave me as a white South African with enormous guilt about the unspeakable damage that's been done to so many lives in the service of this particular misbegotten ideal. And of course, white people in South Africa still, even though apartheid has fallen, remain in the position of privilege and power. In the case of many of us, not out of choice, but just because the economic model that we sit with is exactly the same one that underpinned apartheid. So the politics have changed, the laws have changed, but essentially the economic situation has not. And that's the heart of the South African problem right now.
I think I asked you the question because, you know, I think it takes a tremendous amount of anger and rage to write, in my opinion, such a quiet novel. you manage to get all of that across, what you just said, but in a very quiet way. It sort of opens out slowly, and in that, I admire you for that. It's a wonderful novel for that.
Well, thank you. I mean, certainly in the case of this book, I think maybe with lots of books, writing can be an act of revenge on the past. I'm certainly taking revenge on memories of my childhood, where a lot of these characters, walked and talked in exactly the way they do here. I mean, it's quite odd to me that for commentators with no connection to South Africa, specifically with no connection to Pretoria, a lot of these characters seem exaggerated for comic effect. They seem grotesque. Whereas I've been approached by a number of people who grew up at that time in Pretoria to say, thank you, that's exactly my memory of it. So in fact, this is a point I made yesterday, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself for some people, but I do believe that a distorted political system gives rise to distorted human beings. And I guess I'm taking revenge on some of those distortions, and definitely on some of those people.
Shehan, your reaction to that? Taking revenge on the past. Did that resonate?
Well, I suppose it is and parts of it, it's an amnesia tale, it's also a revenge tale. But I think what resonated more for me was the idea of guilt. And I can relate to the idea of Colombo middle class Sinhala Buddhist guilt, because the period I'm writing about, I was a teenager at the time, but I remember I saw the fear, and I had no real awareness of the dimensions of the brutality or even what the complicated political situation at the time. And other than the fact that schools were closed and there were curfews and checkpoints and so on. And it's only later when, I met people who grew up, of my generation, who grew up in Jaffna or Batikalo or Trinco, or my wife's family who was in the plantations during the JVP uprising, where planters were, for not turning off the factory, you'd find them wrapped around trees in grotesque manners, which I've described in the book. And I hear their stories and I realize what a harrowing experience it was, whereas I sort of, you're aware of terror attacks, bomb blasts, assassinations, and you do see dead bodies on the street, but I was never threatened, and I didn't feel that my life was in danger because, I was insulated in Colombo. And I think that's very much part of the book as well. Mali Almeida also talks about the Colombo bubble, where, and I think you can see it perhaps in my first book as well, where while the war is raging, the book centers on two men who just decide to ignore everything that's happening and watch cricket and drink arak and spend their time doing that. And that's what we did in Colombo, because we didn't think the war would end ever. The fact that it ended in 2009 was such a cause for celebration, but we thought it was there in my childhood, it was a forever war. And we got on with life. Even today, if you go in December, in the midst of the economic crisis, if you went to Colombo in December, and a power crisis, Christmas lights were on and people were spending at restaurants, and Colombo was partying like, okay, it's been a bad year, but the worst is behind us. And so I guess the difference was Mali Almeida felt this Colombo guilt and decided that he wanted to do something about it, and he went to these dangerous places and took photographs in the hope of educating Colombo. All I did was play video games and stay at home and write a novel about it 30 years later. But yeah, that idea, and so I don't know if I wrote it for revenge. I mean, I didn't particularly have access to grind, but I did write it of untold stories and unsolved murders that are not being talked about. The fact is, selective amnesia seems to be something that plagues the subcontinent and perhaps the whole world. But I noticed that we seem to be wrapped up in the catastrophe that's at hand or what's coming. We don't talk about the Easter attacks, 2019, not that long ago. There were many narratives, many conspiracy theories, and then that's bygones. And 89 is almost treated like ancient history, even though it's very much in my lifetime. We don't talk about it, and even talking about it, there's a lot of pushback saying, well, why are you bringing up that stuff again? You know, do you want these conflicts to start again? And so I relate to that aspect, I guess, more than, and the revenge aspect is certainly there in the book. The idea, do you avenge your death, or do you let your life go and move on and walk into the light? So that conflict is there. But certainly I think the Colombo bubble and Colombo guilt, that's something that survives to this very day.
Thank you. I think in a lot of what you said, the Karachiites sitting in front of us can relate to a country in an economic meltdown, a country that practices social apartheid. We're pretty much experts on that. And yet we partied like there was no tomorrow in December and January. People visiting Pakistan would have been hard-pressed to think that there was a problem in a certain group of people. On social amnesia of a war and its effects and avenging for the past, Sinan, what's your take on that, and how much of your writing is influenced by that?
No, I definitely identify with that, and I think it's a fundamental problem in every society in various degrees. I mean, Faulkner said the past is not dead, it's not even past. And whether it's the United States or South Africa, I mean, we all know, for example, how the United States has yet to reckon with its past and with the systems of oppression that founded the entire country, and the same goes for South Africa. And to my mind, the past is always a battleground, actually, because the past is always deployed to justify current policies. And so there is always the official past that the state disseminates in its narratives or mainstream history. And then I think writers and poets and artists, most of them or some of them, are always writing against that collective amnesia and rescuing the voices of the oppressed who are not in the archive, or whose suffering is forgotten, or who are nameless and faceless and are not counted amongst the dead because they're of a certain race or a certain background, and because it's a cliche, but it's very true that the victors are the ones who write history. So how does one rescue the memories of those whose stories have not been told? So definitely, it's a revenge against a certain type of past that reproduces the same violence that killed all those people or silenced them or turned them into enslaved people, and that continues to do so. And there is an added oppression of their memory when they are erased. And so I mean, in a way, all my novels are about that, specifically the last one, because living also in a world that supposedly measures everything and quantifies everything, how is it? Well, not how is it, that's a naive answer. There are millions of lives that are not even counted. They're not even part. And there are explicit statements sometimes during war or systems of apartheid when those officials tell you, for example, General Tommy Franks of the United States, when he was asked about Iraqi civilians who were killed, he said, we don't do body counts. And then the concept of collateral damage, which was devised by the United States Army in the 50s, came to encompass all of those humans who don't matter, because sadly, there is a hierarchy of human worth in this world. We all know it, and we see it after catastrophes. We saw it with Syria and Turkey. We saw it with Ukraine. We don't see it with Yemen, where some people's lives matter more than other people's lives. So that's why I wrote a whole novel called The Book of Collateral Damage about a insane bookseller in Baghdad. Well, not insane, maybe he's saner than all of us, who wants to write the history of the war, where he accounts not only for all the humans who died, but all the objects, all the trees, or the animals that were destroyed. Of course, it's an impossible project, but the failure of the project raises questions about how we live in this world and what we're doing to other species and to the planet. Sounds like a speech.
No, it's an important speech, and you also said that you know, all these years of the war in Iraq, CNN was giving us, or all the news outlets were telling us the point of view of the soldiers, and in Afghanistan, the point of view of bombers,
Yes.
but not what they were doing.
I just want to give one example that I saw yesterday on Twitter. I shouldn't go on Twitter, but I should be writing, but I keep doing it. But it shows you also the problem with the liberals in a lot of these elite societies. So Lawrence something, a very prominent journalist in the United States who writes for The New Yorker, is visiting the West Bank town of Hebron in the West Bank with a Palestinian activist to show him the problems of living under Israeli occupation. And the Israeli soldier beats up the Palestinian who's accompanying the journalist. And what does the journalist write on Twitter? That this really showed him how the occupation is dehumanizing the soldier. So it's an amazing moment of blindness, but what you brought up is very important. How, to what degree people identify not with the victim, but with the victimizer, which is a catastrophe, of course.
Will you read for us from your book?
Yes, I would. Definitely. The book of Collateral Damage. The bookseller in Baghdad is haunted by these wars and by how to quantify everything. So he has this project of writing the narratives of every object and every sentient being that was destroyed. And this is kind of the preamble of his book, where he tries to approach the problem of how to write about all of this. How can I write what happened? This how kept me up at night for many years. And how can what I write escape the traps of distortion and the domination of official history? I realize there is something paradoxical and ironic about it. Is it reasonable to worry about the fate of what I write before my pen even begins to bleed ink onto paper? There's a wonderful African proverb in Shibe's novel, Things Fall Apart, that goes, until lions have their own historians, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. The idea isn't new, of course, but the metaphor is a gem. The victors are always the ones who write history. And by the time someone who wants to revise, question, or change it comes along, it's already too late. But what about the history of the victim, or the victim's victim? That's what I'm concerned with. The first time I read the proverb, I empathized with the lion, of course. But then I thought hard about the matter and reconsidered to discover, or rather remember, that I should be in solidarity with the lion's victim. I imagined, even felt that I was inhabiting the gazelle or any other prey in this equation because it represents me and I represent it. I even feel I am it. I am the one who's been marginalized and disappeared at least twice. I am the prey's prey. As for numbers, they don't serve the purpose. Statistics may count us, but at best they diminish our lives and our deaths. They dehumanize us, assuming there is someone to count in the first place, because the historians of the hunt count the number of dead hunters. Numbers turn us into numbers, dead signs and symbols in comparative studies designed to improve the hunt and make it more efficient. Our details disappear. Our features, color, voices, memories, skin, eyes, and so on. And once we've been skinned, our skins might be tanned and hung on the wall in the hunters' houses. Or photographs of the hunters standing next to our dead bodies to celebrate a new record might be hung on a museum wall. But where should I begin and how? Can I enter time through a hole or through the window of one moment in time? I believe so. And as soon as I get inside time, I can take the moment and analyze it, and if it's a tear, as if it's a tear or a drop of blood under the microscope, and discover the bonds and interactions that produce it. But how can I describe the moment when it isn't a moment, but in fact more like a tree? So I have to get down to the roots and listen to the earth's conversations with the tree and what it drinks from the earth. Then there is the trunk and everyone who has ever leaned on it or carved their name on it, and the branches and their memory and everything the wind has picked up and scattered far and wide. and all the birds that have perched on it on their way to distant places, and the ones that have nested in it, and so on. It's a labyrinth. And which particular moment are we talking about? Is the moment the same moment everywhere, or is each moment associated with its own place in the universe? If this last possibility is the case, then there is more than one time. There are times that might intersect but never coincide. I'll stop here. Thanks.
Is the moment the same moment everywhere, Shehan?
That's a big question. I don't know if I have an answer for that, but
Can
I
you
certainly,
read?
a lot of stuff resonated, the idea of the faceless and the nameless. And I mean, that's central. I think the passage I'm going to read is about this I mean, his amnesia, him trying to recall not just who killed him, but the photographs he'd taken. Because there is one thing we notice in Sri Lanka, 1983. 1983 is seen as the start of the whole mess, the anti-Tamil pogroms that happened on Colombo streets and across the island. And the thing is, there's no acknowledgement, there's no memorial, certainly no apology. There's no even official death count, but we know hundreds of thousands of Tamils had to flee the country, and I would hazard the guess that it would be in the tens of thousands. But the thing is, it's not memorialized, but on the internet, every July, Black July, we have posts saying never forget. But it's the same 3 photographs that are recycled. And I wonder, with all these atrocities, and I talked to Anita Pratap in Kerala, who was there on the ground as a young journalist, and I said, where are all the photographs? Why? And we don't identify. We see the faces of the perpetrators. No one was prosecuted. And so that's why the conceit of this was that he had taken these photographs and that he could identify all the perpetrators of 83 and that it was hidden. And it just occurred to me that that's why it fades from memory. We have the stats and we have novels written about it, but for the generation born afterwards, it's not real unless they can see the atrocities. And I just wonder why there was so few photographic evidence, whether it was said photographers weren't allowed to the battlefields or whether they sit under a box under someone's bed, and that was the conceit here. Yeah, I'll just read this short chapter. It's where Mali recalls certain aspects of his life. It's called Light the Corners of Your Mind. You don't remember learning to walk or talk or being taught to shit in a pot. Who does? You don't remember being in the womb, coming out of one, or being in an incubator, or where you were before that. Memory comes to you in bodily ailments, in sneezes, in aches, in scratches, and in itches. Strange, as you no longer have a body, though maybe the hypnotists are right. Maybe pain and pleasure reside only in the mind. Memories come to you in gasps and chokes and loose motions. They happen every time you pull the camera to your eyes. In its glass peephole, you catch glimpses of light falling on faces, shadows spreading over hills, of pictures you took and lenses you cracked. You remember bits and you retrieve pieces. You feel the stab in the appendix as you see Albert Caballana and Lakshmi Almeida at Pasikuda Beach, holding hands on the eve of their son's 10th birthday, back when they still played mixed doubles badminton. Bertie is a few years from leaving. Lucky, a few years from drinking in the afternoons. He is unaware of the disease already inside. She is unaware of Auntie Dalreen. You click the silent Nikon and see a man stripped and beaten while a laughing mob gathers sticks for a bonfire. That's the picture that made the dark lady with the big lips call you. The Queen of Spades, whose name does not arrive to you, no matter how much you wince or groan. You press down on the cracked button and see an unexploded suicide bomber jacket whose owner was killed while trying to escape, filmed using candlelight. You didn't need any lights at the Surya Kanda mass grave, where the sunrise turned the paddy fields golden. You squint and stare at skeletons stretched to the horizon, dead children as far as the eye could see, young boys made to write suicide notes to their families before being executed, for the crime of taunting the son of a school principal who knew a colonel in the SDF. You don't remember how many times you cheated on Dee Dee, only that you felt guilty only once. You don't remember voting for JR or losing 13 lakhs in 3 minutes or telling your father the thing that broke him, but you know you did all three. You do not remember Sena, neither meeting him nor attending rallies nor trying to kiss him. You do not remember dying, how it happened or who was around, and why you'd rather not know. Maybe you were taken for doing your job too well, like all those journos and activists over the last decade. Maybe you were snuffed for taunting someone whose father knew someone. Maybe you did it yourself, not like you hadn't tried before. All scenarios are plausible. Though, as every gambler knows, the biggest killer in this godless universe is the random roll of the dice. Plain, stinking, jungle variety bad luck. The thing that gets us all. Thank you.
Damon, in The Promise, your character, Amor, seems to know how to heal wounds.
Does she?
Does she?
There's only one character in this rather unappealing family with any kind of moral impulse, and that's Amor. You know, as a young girl, when she was 6 years old, sitting on that same hill, she was struck by lightning, and it's, in the family's eyes, made her into an odd, otherwise sort of person. She definitely doesn't seem to function the way most other people do. And she's the one person in the family that believes this promise must be fulfilled, and she doggedly returns to it with every family gathering, much to the irritation of her siblings. Somebody asked me at a session recently if I had intended, I'm not sure I'm going to remember the correct phrase, it seems to be one in current usage, if I'd intended to make her, yeah, I'm not going to remember the phrase, neurologically other. Yes, and I had not actually worked, it's a phrase, incidentally, which I think in current usage refers to people who are on the spectrum in some way. And it had not been my conscious intention, but the moment this question was put to me, I realized that, yes, that's exactly what she is. One of the characteristics of autism is a heightened sense of right and wrong, and a corresponding sense of outrage at injustice, and it seems to be part of what motivates her. On the other hand, because she does exist in the real world, it takes 30 years for the promise to be fulfilled. So, you know, I would guard against any easy interpretation of her as a kind of savior figure or a heroine in that respect. She can't let go of it, I guess, and perhaps in the murky moral workings of the world that we inhabit, an inability to let go of a moral question is a defect of some sort, or a sign of something being wrong with you. We're meant to move on, we're meant to compromise, accommodate, and so on. But if each of us in some way found it impossible to move on from an unresolved moral question, the world might be in a better state than it is. I have a feeling you asked us to prepare very particular passages. I'm afraid it's absolutely not Maniza's fault, but that has gone from what is laughingly known as my mind. I have a passage I can read, but I don't think it's the passage you might want me to read. Do you have a passage you'd like me to read?
No, I don't. I just feel that the conversation is leading to, that everything is fitting in nicely. Yes.
Well,
Although
in
we
fact,
didn't prepare for this. I mean, together, the four of us didn't, right?
Well, the passage may not be building on it. In fact, I chose it in response to what was being discussed earlier, the fact that the lives and experiences of the oppressed are what is generally erased, and what is kept in prominence are the lives of the oppressors. So perhaps as a small antidote to that, I've taken a passage where Ma, who is the first the first family member to die in my book, returns as a ghost to the family. So in some sense, perhaps the dead are always with us. I was reflecting actually in the exchange that was happening earlier on something else, not directly relevant, but how a sense that I was left with very strongly after reading Remembrance of Things Past, the Proust book, which felt profoundly true to me, that everything that happens in the world disappears instantly. Before it's completed, it's gone. That's absolutely true on one hand. And in some mysterious way that's very hard to define, nothing ever disappears. The past is here with us at every moment. And I think all of us feel this profound paradox in some way or another. Anyway, here is the spirit. The spirit of Rachel Swart lingers around the house in a state of confusion. She becomes almost visible at certain moments when the light or the mood is right, but only to those who are willing to see, and then only obliquely at the edges of things. She appeared at Amor out of the mirror not long ago, though what she was rarely gazing at was the scene of her final exit, a fact she finds hard to take in. It's not uncommon. The dead are frequently unable to accept their condition. They resemble the living in that respect, but they have forgotten what they're nostalgic for. Much is lost in the crossing over, and when they see you, they do not know you. Tojo, the Alsatian, observes her coming and going without difficulty because he hasn't learned that it isn't possible. She lifts the kitchen curtain to sneak a glance at Salome just for a second, a peripheral shimmer. Astrid thinks she hears her calling from her room down the passage, needing help again, always at the worst possible moment, but of course it's just a loose window hinge in the wind. She rattles the small change in her purse the way she used to, but when Marnie calls out from the bath, she doesn't answer. Presses her cold lips to Anton's forehead while he sleeps. Eventually, she tires of the house and becomes noticeable in the streets of Pretoria, in places she liked to visit. She paddles in the pond at Magnolia Dell, drinks tea at a cafe in Berkeley Square, looks through the fence of the Austin Roberts Bird Sanctuary at a sad blue crane pecking something shiny on the ground. You get the idea. She touches down where her spirit was once thick, but she's no longer solid, a watercolor woman. In the crowd, she is just another face, not much evident. She crosses large distances as if going from room to room looking for something she's lost. In these appearances, she wears different items of clothing from her wardrobe, an evening gown, a flimsy summer dress, even a shawl she bought once on Apro from Truworths and took back the next day. She looks real, which is to say ordinary. How would you know if she's a ghost? Many of the living are vague and adrift too. It's not a failing unique to the departed. Leave it there too.
Shehan, will you tell us the meaning of the 7 moons? What are the 7 moons?
So it's interesting that we have ghosts in common, and your ghosts seem to move in the same manner that mine do. Yes, I suppose I had to come up with rules for the afterlife because the ghosts are visible throughout. And I did borrow from a lot of local folklore. I read the religious texts, the philosophical texts, Dante's Inferno, the horror movies, and I could grab from a lot of places, but I just thought the simplest was Sri Lankan folklore, which I've seen around Asia, certainly, that the idea that the spirit hovers for 7 days. So after the 7th day, we have an almsgiving, and priests will come in and say a prayer for the spirit to finally go to the next place where they're going. And we do it again after. If the spirit misses their 7 days, then another bus arrives through the 3-month almsgiving. So that's 90 days. And so that's what I based it on. But also, since I was writing a murder mystery, the ticking clock is always part of that convention. One, you have lots of suspects, but you also have a ticking clock. And so he has 7 days in which to make peace with his life and solve his murder. So that's where it came from. Yeah.
Thank you. I know that we have very little time left. Would you like us to continue this way, or do you have questions? Okay, a question right there. Gentleman right there. And then, no, okay. Well, all right.
That's the luck. Well, I've got a question about Pretoria. Is it working? Yeah. I was interested in you mentioned that you wrote it because of your feeling of guilt about the past. And I asked you this question, and my question is it a collective guilt, or is it individual to you as a writer? Or is it common with other writers as well? And I asked you this for what Mr. Sinan described in Iraq and Palestine. And when the Americans say that they don't count the dead bodies, the reaction in Britain was that the British Medical Journal took the photocopies of the photographs from the journalist who actually counted all the dead bodies. And it came to it collectively 1 million in that thing. And in actual fact, Iraq would always be considered a failure for American history. So my question to you is it a collective feeling of distress, and how common it is? But oppressors always take advantage of the occupied population. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question, but it runs very deep. There's a level on which everybody, I think, feels their guilt individually. I mean, it's up to each of us how much we engage with the past and how we're implicated in it. And of course, humans are very, very creative in deflecting pain of any sort and certainly responsibility of any kind. If you go to South Africa and speak to white South Africans, you'll get multiple responses. And it's enraging to me how many white South Africans deny having benefited from apartheid in any shape or form. They are not people who appear to be actively carrying guilt. On the other hand, I do believe in such a thing as collective guilt. And it's, for me, very telling how vehemently people deny their responsibility for things. It seems to me a kind of admission of guilt in a way. And if I watch what's playing out in America now, the vehemence of the response to racial issues says to me those racial issues go very deep. And on some level, whether you acknowledge it or not, each of you knows your part in that. That's how it feels. So it's a very big question, and it's a very short answer, but I hope it is some kind of response.
Yeah, so I want to ask you, you're clearly not very happy with the trajectory South Africa has taken post-apartheid. So I want to ask, imagine an alternate trajectory, what would it be?
For me, the real tragedy of the so-called new South Africa is that South Africa's problems are solvable. There are people, very capable people, even some of them in government, who would be able to deliver the solutions to the problems we have. Yet we have not gone down that road. So it seems to me an organization like the ANC, which is supposed to represent the dispossessed and those at the receiving end of apartheid, they were a great moral force as a resistance movement. As a government, they've been a kleptocracy. So there's been a very myopic, short-term greed, I guess, that's played out. It's not because we can't solve the problems, it's because there hasn't been the will, and there's been a switch over from notions of idealism and selflessness to very, very small short-term desire for people to enrich themselves and improve their position. We're where we are now because of a mixture of maladministration, incompetence, and corruption. But we could have been somewhere entirely different. Yeah, again, it's a very big question.
Your, may I? Okay. Your writing is actually full of irony. It does not contain any empathy. The writing does not console anyone. So with reference to the first question of collective guilt, how do you see this collective guilt as opposed to the black experience, since you don't console anyone?
I'm sorry, how do I see the collective guilt as opposed to?
Black experience in apartheid. Black experience.
I think it's pretty plain from my book that I'm not speaking for the black experience. I mean, for obvious reasons, I haven't lived that experience. I am, unfortunately, part of a white minority that has not behaved very well, and that is an experience I can speak to and out of. What I have tried to do with the central character, the most important character in my book is a black woman. I have not given her a voice. That's not because I'm overlooking her in any shape or form. I wanted her silence to be the most eloquent thing about her, because we're nearly 30 years into democracy and people like Salome still have no voice and no agency whatsoever. The revolution in South Africa was meant to provide her with a voice. So what I hope the outcome of, what I hope to leave a reader with, somebody who sits and reads my book, is a sense of feeling uncomfortable, implicated, and perhaps somewhat involved in her silence. I didn't want to write a book that made people feel, we've paid Salome her dues in a literary sense. We don't need to pay attention to her in the real world. There are other writers on stage, folks.
A slightly different kind of a question. So all three writers are heavily influenced by the socio-political upheaval they've lived through to the point of dystopia in the case of Sri Lanka. So aside from that, I believe for writers, other writers are also an influence. So I would like to ask them, which writers have been an influence on you or inspiration in your writing?
You go first, and then Sinan.
Well, I mean, I've made no secret that absurdity is the common thread linking certainly my two novels and I suppose my short story collection. So I lean very heavily on Kurt Vonnegut, George Saunders, Douglas Adams, Margaret Atwood, writers who are writing about particularly grim things, but the writing itself is not. The writing is actually, it can make you laugh and break your heart and depress you about the meaninglessness of everything within a sense of a paragraph. So, I mean, there are obviously many writers who are influencers, but I think those are the main ones that I ended up returning to and getting inspiration from.
Yes, I mean, briefly, we're not aware of all the traces that writers leave in us, but for me, Beckett, early on, George Orwell, Toni Morrison, Italo Calvino, but I also, a lot of poets, actually, a lot of poetry. And in this last novel that I read from Walter Benjamin, the German Jewish philosopher, because to me he's one of the most eloquent voices on how to think of history in times of oppression. So, but it's not just literary authors, it's also historians and, yeah.
In the case of this particular book, I would say the spirit of William Faulkner hung very heavily over me. Virginia Woolf too. I think Faulkner is extraordinary with his use of voice. Virginia Woolf with her use of time. Other writers who really matter to me, also Beckett and W.G. Sebald, German writer. I could go on, but those are a key core group.
My question from Sri Lankan writer.
Is there another question out there? Yeah, right in the back.
My question from a Sri Lankan friend is that was it more better if the Jaffna uprising problem in Sri Lanka was dealt in other way?
Sorry, the what uprising? I didn't understand.
So was it more appropriate if the government had dealt it with the other way, in other way?
You're talking to the recent uprising or last year's?
Both.
I lose track of the uprisings. They happen every week.
There were the forces against government system. How better if it was resolved through talks, or as we talk today that every issue can be resolved through the talks, but here the force was used in Sri Lanka. So how do you think?
So you're going back to the Tamil Tigers and, okay. That uprising, yeah. Okay, so I'll be very quick. I mean, maybe we can, I think we're going for a signing. I can chat to you about it, but we had a clear decision in 2005. There was an election that happened between, the current president who's been around forever, and the Rajapaksas. And it was basically, I mean, I'm simplifying it, but it was one party said we're going to keep negotiating, maintain the ceasefire, and the other party said no, we're going to end the war. And it was very telling that Prabhakaran, the leader of the Tamil Tigers, and there's again conspiracy theories around this, forbade anyone in the north and the east, any of the Tamils who voted in that election, and obviously they would have voted for a ceasefire because they were bearing the brunt of it. He forbade any of them from voting on threat of death. So we know what happened afterwards. The war party won, and you could then look at history and say that Prabhakaran signed his own death warrant by doing that. So I think my opinion doesn't really count, whether it seemed like the forces of history had pushed us away from the ceasefire and towards a full-on scale war, which I guess one party didn't think they were going to lose, and the opposite happened. So, yeah, it's a big topic, but I think the decision was there in 2005, and the nation took the path it took.
Thank you very much to Sinan, Shehan, and Damon. I hope you all enjoyed this session as much as I did over here. And again, thank you all for being here with us. It's really an honor for all of us to have such wonderful writers in this literature festival with us. Thank you.